The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty main street of Oro Grande, California, and Rebecca Ramsey pressed one trembling hand against her swollen belly, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life. The year was 1878, and the summer heat bore down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled in the Mojave Desert. Rebecca had traveled all the way from Boston, answering an advertisement placed by a rancher named Thomas Harper, who sought a wife to help him manage his sprawling cattle operation. They had exchanged exactly 3 letters before she made the decision to come west, each correspondence brief but respectful, outlining practical expectations rather than romantic notions. What Thomas Harper did not know, what she had not written in her careful responses, was that she carried another man's child beneath her heart. The driver offered his weathered hand to help her down, and Rebecca gathered her courage along with her modest traveling bag. Her dark hair, pinned beneath a simple bonnet, had come loose during the long journey, and dust clung to every inch of her worn blue dress. She was 22 years old, alone, and desperate enough to have traveled across an entire continent on the promise of a stranger. "You the mail-order bride for Harper?" the driver asked, not unkindly. "Yes, sir," Rebecca replied, her Boston accent still crisp despite her exhaustion. "His place is about 5 miles north. He said he would meet you here at the hotel." The driver gestured toward a 2-story wooden structure with a faded sign that read, "Oro Grande Hotel and Saloon." Rebecca's hands shook as she smoothed down her dress, a futile gesture given the condition of her clothing. She had rehearsed what she would say 1,000 times during the journey, but now that the moment had arrived, her carefully prepared words scattered like tumbleweeds in the desert wind. How did one tell a man who expected a wife that she was already carrying another man's shame? She walked slowly toward the hotel, each step feeling heavier than the last. Through the dusty window she could see a tall figure standing inside, hat in hand. Even from this distance, she could tell he was a large man, broad-shouldered and solid. Thomas Harper was 30 years old according to his letters, a widower who had lost his first wife to influenza 3 years prior. He ran a cattle ranch with the help of several hired hands and needed a woman who was not afraid of hard work and isolation. Rebecca pushed open the door, and a small bell chimed above her head. The man turned, and she found herself looking into a pair of striking blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. Thomas Harper was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, with sandy brown hair and a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. He wore the practical clothing of a working rancher, denim trousers, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and dusty leather boots. "Miss Ramsey." His voice was deep and careful, the voice of a man unused to speaking with women. "Yes, Mr. Harper, I presume." Rebecca set down her bag, her heart hammering so hard she feared he might hear it. Thomas took a step forward, his eyes moving over her face with an expression that might have been approval or simply assessment. Then his gaze dropped lower, and Rebecca watched as understanding dawned in those blue eyes. His expression did not change dramatically, but she saw the slight widening of his eyes, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see," he said slowly. "That is something you might have mentioned in your letters, Miss Ramsey." The disappointment in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks, shame and fear warring within her chest. "I know. I should have. I wanted to, but I was afraid you would not let me come, and I had nowhere else to go." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying her face now rather than her condition. "Who is the father? Is he following you here? Am I going to have trouble from some man claiming rights?" "No," Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. "He was a merchant's son in Boston. He promised marriage, but when I told him about the child, he said I was trying to trap him. His family paid me $200 to leave the city and never contact them again. I used that money to come here. So he knows about the baby. Yes, he wants nothing to do with either of us." Thomas set his hat on a nearby table and ran one hand through his hair. Rebecca could see him thinking, working through the situation with the same methodical approach he probably used for everything in his life. She braced herself for rejection, for the harsh words she probably deserved, for being sent back to a city where she had no family and no prospects. "How far along are you?" Thomas asked finally. "About 4 months, I think, maybe closer to 5. Her hand moved protectively to her stomach. Thomas nodded slowly, then looked directly into her eyes. "I am a man of my word, Miss Ramsey. I sent for a wife and you answered that call. I know what it takes to make a mistake, and I know what it costs a woman to admit to one. If you are willing to be my wife, to work alongside me and help build something good on my land, then I am still willing to marry you." Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. "Even though I am carrying another man's child." Thomas took another step closer, and she could see the kindness in his eyes now, buried beneath the caution and the practical nature. That child did not ask to be born into these circumstances. A baby deserves a father, deserves a name and a home. If you will have me as your husband, then that child will know my name as father. I will raise him or her as my own, with no distinction, no shame attached. That is my promise to you." The tears spilled over then, running down Rebecca's dusty cheeks. In that moment, standing in the dim interior of a frontier hotel, she felt something shift in her chest. This man, this stranger who owed her nothing, was offering her and her child salvation without judgment, without cruelty. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "Why would you do this?" she asked, needing to understand. "You could send me back. You could find another woman, one who comes to you without complications." Thomas smiled slightly, the first real warmth she had seen from him. "Out here, Miss Ramsey, we do not have the luxury of perfect circumstances. Life is hard and it is often unfair, but I believe in doing what is right more than what is easy. I need a wife, you need a husband, and that baby needs a father. Seems to me like we can help each other if you are willing." Rebecca wiped at her tears with shaking hands. "I will work hard. I promise you that. I will be a good wife and I will never give you cause to regret this kindness. Then we have an understanding." Thomas picked up his hat. "There is a preacher in town who can marry us today if you are agreeable. We can get you settled at the ranch before nightfall. Today." Rebecca's voice came out higher than intended. "No point in waiting. You are exhausted from your journey and I have a ranch that needs tending. Unless you want time to reconsider." "No," Rebecca said quickly. "No, I want to marry you. I am just surprised by your decisiveness. I do not believe in dragging things out unnecessarily, but I want you to know what you are agreeing to, Miss Ramsey. My ranch is not fancy. It is a working cattle operation and life there is demanding. We are 5 miles from town, which means we do not see people often. The work is constant. The weather can be brutal, and there are dangers, snakes, the occasional mountain lion, and drifters looking for easy targets. I have 3 hired hands who live in the bunkhouse, good men who will treat you with respect. I expect you to help with the cooking, the garden, and whatever else needs doing. In return, I will provide for you and the child, protect you both, and treat you with the respect due a wife. Does that sound acceptable?" Rebecca nodded. "It sounds more than acceptable. It sounds like a chance at a real life. Then let us go find that preacher." The wedding was brief and practical, conducted in a small church that smelled of dust and old wood. There were no flowers, no guests beyond the preacher's wife who served as witness, and no wedding dress beyond Rebecca's travel-stained blue one. When Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Rebecca felt the weight of it like an anchor, something solid to hold onto in uncertain waters. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said. Thomas leaned down and pressed a chaste, gentle kiss to Rebecca's lips. It was quick and respectful, nothing like the passionate kisses she had once shared with the merchant's son who had abandoned her. But there was something solid and real about it, a promise sealed with quiet dignity rather than empty passion. Afterward, Thomas helped her into a sturdy wagon loaded with supplies from town. The ranch was indeed about 5 miles north, following a rutted road that cut through scrubland dotted with Joshua trees and sage. The heat was oppressive, and Rebecca was grateful for the bonnet that shaded her face. Thomas drove in companionable silence, occasionally pointing out landmarks. "That is Miller's Creek," he said, gesturing to a dry wash. "During spring runoff it actually has water. My land starts at that fence line ahead." Rebecca looked where he pointed and saw miles of open range stretching toward distant mountains. Cattle grazed in scattered groups, their hides ranging from brown to black to dusty red. The ranch house appeared gradually, a solid wooden structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. It was larger than she expected, well-maintained and surrounded by several outbuildings including a barn, a bunkhouse, and various sheds. "It is a good place," Thomas said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "My father built the original cabin, and I have been adding to it for the past 10 years. There is a root cellar, a good well, and enough land to support several hundred head of cattle. It is not Boston, but it is mine." "It is beautiful," Rebecca said honestly. After the cramped, dirty streets of Boston and the endless journey west, the open space and clean air felt like a blessing. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and careful on her waist. 3 men emerged from the barn, wiping their hands on their trousers. They were dusty, weathered cowboys who looked at Rebecca with open curiosity. "Men, this is my wife, Rebecca," Thomas said, his voice carrying authority. "I expect you to treat her with proper respect. Rebecca, this is Charlie, Miguel, and young Sam." Charlie was an older man with gray in his beard. Miguel had kind brown eyes and a ready smile, and young Sam could not have been more than 19, with red hair and freckles covering every visible inch of skin. They each tipped their hats to her. "Pleased to meet you, madam," Charlie said, and the others echoed his greeting. "Rebecca will be helping with meals, so you will be seeing more of her than you saw of me burning beans over the fire," Thomas said, and the men chuckled. "Now help me unload these supplies, then get back to checking the fence line in the north pasture." The men moved to obey, and Thomas guided Rebecca toward the house. Inside, it was cooler, with thick walls that held back the worst of the heat. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was simple but well made, clearly crafted by hand. Doorways led to what she assumed were bedrooms. "This is the main bedroom," Thomas said, showing her a spacious room with a large bed covered in a plain quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window looking out over the front porch. "There is another bedroom through that door, and a small room I use for ranch business. The privy is out back, and there is a bathing room of sorts off the kitchen where we can heat water." Rebecca set down her bag, suddenly aware of how intimate this all was. She was married to this man, would be sharing this house with him, this room, this bed. He must have seen something in her expression because his face softened. "I know this is all happening very fast," Thomas said quietly. I do not expect anything from you tonight beyond rest. You are exhausted from your journey and we are still strangers to each other. We have time to figure out how this marriage will work. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her again. Thank you, she managed. You have been far more understanding than I had any right to expect. Why do not you rest for a bit? Thomas suggested. There is water in the pitcher for washing. I will handle supper tonight, give you a chance to settle in. Tomorrow will be soon enough to start learning the routine around here. After Thomas left, closing the door quietly behind him, Rebecca sank onto the bed and finally let herself cry in earnest. But these were not tears of despair. For the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope. She had found herself a good man against all odds, and she was determined not to disappoint him. Over the following days, Rebecca began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. She woke before dawn to start breakfast for Thomas and the hired hands, cooking massive quantities of eggs, beans, biscuits, and bacon. Thomas had not exaggerated about his lack of cooking skills. The first time she served a meal, Miguel had actually closed his eyes in apparent ecstasy. "Real food," he said reverently. "We have been eating Charlie's cooking for months, and that man can burn water." "I heard that," Charlie called from outside, and everyone laughed. The work was constant but satisfying. Rebecca tended a kitchen garden that was struggling in the summer heat, learning from Thomas how to irrigate using water from the well. She cleaned the house, mended clothing, and began the endless cycle of laundry. Her pregnancy made some tasks more difficult, but she pushed through, determined to prove her worth. Thomas was patient with her, answering her questions about ranch life and showing her how things worked. He had a quiet competence that she found reassuring. He never raised his voice, never showed anger, and always treated her with careful respect. At night, they shared the large bed, but Thomas kept to his side and she to hers, a careful distance maintained. 2 weeks after her arrival, Rebecca was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard raised voices outside. She looked through the window to see Thomas standing in the yard facing 2 men on horseback. They were rough-looking characters, unshaven and dirty, with the kind of hardness in their faces that spoke of violence. "We are just passing through," one of them was saying. "Thought we might water our horses." "Water them at the trough and move on," Thomas replied, his voice level but firm. "This is private property." "Seems unfriendly," the second man said, and his hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Before Rebecca could even think, she was out the door with the shotgun Thomas kept by the kitchen entrance. She did not point it at anyone, just held it casually in her arms, but the message was clear. Thomas glanced at her, and she saw approval flicker in his eyes. The 2 drifters looked between Thomas and Rebecca, reassessing. Then Charlie, Miguel, and young Sam appeared from the barn, also armed. The odds had shifted dramatically. "Water your horses," Thomas repeated. "Then ride on." The men did as they were told, sullen but cowed. They drank from the well, watered their horses, and left without another word. Once they were out of sight, Thomas turned to Rebecca. "You handled that well," he said, "but do not ever put yourself in danger like that again." "I could say the same to you," Rebecca replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "Those men were dangerous. They were testing me, seeing if I was an easy target. Now they know I am not alone here." Thomas took the shotgun from her hands. "But promise me you will stay inside if something like that happens again." "Only if you promise to be careful," Rebecca countered. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "You are not what I expected, Rebecca Harper." "Neither are you, Thomas Harper." It was the first time they had used each other's first names so casually, and Rebecca felt something warm unfold in her chest. She was beginning to understand her husband, this quiet man who showed his care through actions rather than words. The way he always served her first at meals. How he had brought her a rocking chair for the porch without saying a word, just set it there one morning. The time he caught her struggling to reach something on a high shelf and built her a small step stool that very afternoon. As August gave way to September and the brutal heat began to ease slightly, Rebecca's pregnancy became more obvious. She felt the baby move for the first time while kneading bread dough, a flutter that made her gasp. Thomas was mending tack at the kitchen table and looked up in concern. "Are you all right?" "The baby moved," Rebecca said, wonder in her voice. "I felt it move." Thomas set down the leather he was working on. "That is normal, right? It is supposed to do that." "Yes, the midwife in Boston said I would start feeling movement around this time." Rebecca pressed her hand to her belly, hoping to feel it again. "May I?" Thomas asked, gesturing toward her stomach. Rebecca nodded, touched that he had asked permission. Thomas crossed the room and carefully placed his large hand on her belly. They stood there in silence for several moments, and then the baby moved again, a distinct push against Rebecca's ribs. Thomas's face broke into a wide smile. "I felt that. I actually felt it." "That is your child," Rebecca said softly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You are the one who will teach this baby to ride, to rope cattle, to be strong and kind. You are choosing to be this child's father, and that means more than any blood tie ever could." Thomas looked at her, and Rebecca saw emotion swimming in his blue eyes. "I meant what I said that first day. This child is mine in every way that matters. And you, Rebecca, you are my wife, not because of some letters or arrangement, but because I choose it every day." "I choose it too," Rebecca whispered. Thomas leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not move, he kissed her, and this time it was not the chaste peck from their wedding day. This was a real kiss, tender and full of promise. Rebecca felt heat spread through her body, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert sun. When they pulled apart, both were breathing harder. "I have wanted to do that for a while now," Thomas admitted. "What took you so long?" Rebecca asked and was rewarded with a laugh. That night, the careful distance in their bed disappeared. Thomas held her close, one hand resting protectively over her belly, and Rebecca felt safer than she ever had in her life. She was falling in love with her husband, she realized. Somewhere between the morning meals and evening conversations, between his quiet competence and unexpected tenderness, she had stopped seeing him as a practical arrangement and started seeing him as her partner, her protector, her home. October brought cooler weather and the annual cattle drive to move part of the herd to winter pasture. Thomas was gone for 5 days, and Rebecca was surprised by how much she missed him. The house felt empty without his steady presence. When he finally returned, dusty and exhausted, Rebecca met him on the porch. "I missed you," she said, and watched pleasure transform his tired face. "I missed you too. Whole time I was out there, I kept thinking about getting home to you." He pulled her into his arms, careful of her growing belly. "I do not like being away from you." "Then take me with you next time," Rebecca suggested. Thomas pulled back to look at her. "On a cattle drive, in your condition. I am pregnant, not made of glass, and I would rather be uncomfortable with you than comfortable without you." "You are definitely not what I expected," Thomas said again. But this time there was love in his voice, clear and unmistakable. As her pregnancy advanced into the 6th and 7th month, Rebecca found herself tiring more easily. Thomas noticed immediately and began adjusting the household routine. He took over the heavier chores without comment, brought in a woman from town twice a week to help with laundry, and insisted Rebecca rest every afternoon. "You are taking care of 2 people," he said when she protested. "That takes energy. Let me take care of you." One evening in early November, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. Rebecca was in her rocking chair, and Thomas sat on the porch step, his back against the post. "I want to tell you something," Rebecca said suddenly. "About the baby's father." Thomas turned to look at her. "You do not have to. I want to. I need you to understand." Rebecca took a breath. "His name was Edmund Whitmore. He was charming and educated, and he told me everything I wanted to hear. He said he loved me, that we would marry, that he would take care of me forever. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. When I told him about the baby, he said I was a liar trying to trap him into marriage. His mother offered me money to leave and never come back, and she said if I refused, they would make sure everyone in Boston knew I was a woman of loose morals. I took the money because I had no other choice, but I have hated myself for it every day since." "You have nothing to hate yourself for," Thomas said firmly. "That man was a coward who took advantage of your trust. His family are people who use money to solve problems they created. You did what you had to do to survive and protect your baby. There is no shame in that. I was so foolish. You were in love. Love makes people vulnerable. It is not foolish to trust someone you care about." Thomas stood and came to kneel beside her chair. "Rebecca, I do not care about Edmund Whitmore or his family. They are part of your past, but I am your future and this child is our future. Nothing that happened before you came here changes how I feel about you." "How do you feel about me?" Rebecca asked, needing to hear the words. "I love you," Thomas said simply. "I think I started loving you the day you walked out with that shotgun, ready to stand beside me against those drifters. But maybe it was before that. Maybe it was when you cried over feeling the baby move, or when you insisted on learning to can tomatoes even though the kitchen was like an oven. I do not know exactly when it happened, but I know I love you, Rebecca Harper. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you hum while you cook. I love the future we are building together." Rebecca felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I love you too. I did not think I could ever feel this way again after Edmund, but what I feel for you is different. It is real and solid and safe. You make me feel like I can be myself without pretending or hiding. I love you, Thomas." Thomas cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. "That is all I needed to hear." Winter came to the Mojave Desert, bringing cold nights and occasional rain that turned the dry landscape briefly green. Rebecca's belly grew large and round, and by December, she felt like she was carrying a small calf rather than a baby. Thomas fussed over her constantly, to the point where the ranch hands started teasing him. "Boss, she is walking to the chicken coop, not climbing a mountain," young Sam said one morning when Thomas insisted on accompanying Rebecca to gather eggs. "You will understand when you have a wife," Thomas replied without embarrassment. Rebecca had become close to the three hired hands. Charlie reminded her of a grandfather, always ready with advice and stories from his years as a cowboy. Miguel taught her Spanish words and made her laugh with his dramatic tales. Young Sam was like an eager younger brother, asking endless questions about Boston and city life. They all treated her with respect and affection, and she felt lucky to have them as part of her extended family. On a cold morning in late January 1879, Rebecca woke to cramping pains. At first she thought it was the beans she had eaten for supper, but as the pain intensified and came in regular waves, she knew the baby was coming. She shook Thomas awake. "It is time," she said, trying to keep the fear from her voice. Thomas was out of bed immediately. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." For the next hour, Thomas moved with controlled urgency. He sent young Sam racing into town to fetch the midwife. moved Rebecca to the bed with extra linens, and boiled water as if his life depended on it. Charlie and Miguel hovered anxiously outside, ready to help if needed. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Anderson, arrived and took charge. She shooed Thomas from the bedroom despite his protests, and Rebecca found herself laboring through the most intense physical experience of her life. It was hours of pain and effort, of Mrs. Anderson's calm instructions, of screaming into a rolled cloth when the contractions peaked. Finally, just as the winter sun was setting, Rebecca heard the sound she had been waiting for, a baby's cry. Mrs. Anderson held up a squalling, red-faced infant. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy." Rebecca collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but overwhelmed with relief and love. Mrs. Anderson cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Rebecca's arms. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny, grasping hands. "Can Thomas come in?" Rebecca asked. "Let me make sure you are settled first," Mrs. Anderson said, but she was smiling. A few minutes later, Thomas entered the room. He looked terrified and awed in equal measure as he approached the bed. Rebecca held out the baby to him. "Meet your son," she said. Thomas took the baby with surprising gentleness for such a large man. He looked down at the infant with an expression of pure wonder. "He is so small. He is almost 9 pounds, according to Mrs. Anderson. He is not small at all." Thomas traced one finger down the baby's cheek. "What should we name him?" Rebecca had thought about this during her pregnancy. "I want to name him after you, Thomas Harper, Jr. You want to name him after me?" Thomas looked at her with shining eyes. "You are his father. He should carry your name." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the baby. "Hello, Tommy," he said softly. "Welcome to your home. I am your father, and I am going to teach you everything I know. How to ride, how to work a ranch, how to be a good man. And I am going to tell you every day how much you are loved." Rebecca watched her husband with their son, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. This was her family, built on honesty and choice rather than blood and obligation. This was love, real and hard-won and precious. Mrs. Anderson stayed for 2 days to help Rebecca recover and teach her about caring for a newborn. The ranch hands took turns peeking in to admire the baby, each of them instantly charmed by tiny Tommy Harper. Miguel carved a small wooden horse as a gift. Charlie knitted a baby blanket with surprisingly skilled hands, and young Sam seemed baffled by how something so small could make so much noise. Thomas was a devoted father from the first moment. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Tommy during fussy nights, and looked at his son as if he had personally hung the moon. Rebecca had worried that when the baby arrived, Thomas might see features of another man and feel differently, but if anything, he seemed even more committed. "He has your eyes," Thomas said one evening as they sat together watching the baby sleep in his cradle. "You think so?" "Definitely. And I think he is going to have your stubbornness too. Look at how he fights sleep." Rebecca laughed softly. "He comes by that honestly." As winter gave way to spring, Rebecca regained her strength and fell into the rhythm of caring for Tommy while managing the household. It was exhausting but joyful, especially with Thomas as her partner. He would come in from working the ranch and immediately take the baby, giving Rebecca a break. He sang to Tommy in a rumbling baritone, cowboy songs and half-remembered hymns that made the baby coo and smile. Tommy grew rapidly, becoming a chubby, happy baby who loved being outside. Thomas rigged up a sling so Rebecca could carry the baby while she worked in the garden, and Tommy seemed fascinated by everything from chickens to clouds. One warm April afternoon, Rebecca was hanging laundry while Tommy napped in a basket nearby when a fancy carriage came up the road. It was so out of place in the rough ranch setting that Rebecca stopped to stare. The carriage pulled up in front of the house, and a well-dressed woman stepped out. Rebecca's blood ran cold. She recognized that woman. It was Edmund Whitmore's mother, Mrs. Cordelia Whitmore. Thomas emerged from the barn, and Rebecca hurried to meet him. "That is his mother," she whispered urgently. "The baby's biological father's mother." Thomas's expression hardened. "Stay behind me." Mrs. Whitmore approached with the confident bearing of someone who expected to be obeyed. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, wearing an expensive traveling dress that must have cost more than Rebecca made in a year back in Boston. "You must be Thomas Harper," she said. "I am Cordelia Whitmore. I believe you have something that belongs to my family." "You are on my land, which means you follow my rules," Thomas replied, his voice cold. "State your business or leave. My business is with that woman." Mrs. Whitmore pointed at Rebecca. "She took money from my family under the agreement that she would disappear. Instead, she has written to various acquaintances in Boston about her new life, her husband, and her son. Those letters have caused my family considerable embarrassment." Rebecca felt panic rising. "I only wrote to 2 friends, and I said nothing bad about your family. I did not even mention Edmund's name. Yet people talk. They speculate. It reflects poorly on my son." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes were sharp as glass. "I've come to offer you more money to move somewhere else, somewhere that my family's reputation will not be affected by your presence." Thomas stepped forward, and there was something dangerous in his posture. "My wife is not going anywhere, and neither is my son. You have no claim here." "That child is my grandson," Mrs. Whitmore said coldly. "My blood. I could take this matter to court." "No court in California is going to give a child to grandparents when he has 2 fit parents and a good home," Thomas replied. "My name is on that boy's birth record as his father. I have raised him since birth. You have no legal standing." Rebecca had never seen Thomas like this, controlled fury radiating from him like heat from a fire. He was a man protecting his family, and Mrs. Whitmore seemed to realize she had miscalculated. "Perhaps we can discuss this reasonably," she tried. "There is nothing to discuss. You and your son abandoned my wife and our child. You paid her to leave because you were ashamed of the consequences of your son's actions. You do not get to change your mind now. Tommy is my son in every way that matters, and you will never, ever have any claim on him." "Edmund might want to be involved," Mrs. Whitmore said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "Then Edmund should have thought of that before he called Rebecca a liar and paid her to disappear," Thomas shot back. "You all made your choice. Now live with it, if it is money you want." "We do not want your money," Thomas's voice rose. "We have everything we need. A home, a livelihood, and each other. Your money is tainted by your cruelty, and we want no part of it. Now get off my land before I have you removed." Mrs. Whitmore looked at Rebecca, and for just a moment, something like uncertainty crossed her face. "Are you happy here?" The question surprised Rebecca. "Yes, I am happier than I have ever been." "With him? In this wilderness?" "With my husband in our home, raising our son," Rebecca said firmly. "Thomas is a better man than Edmund could ever be. He chose to love me and Tommy when he did not have to. That is worth more than all your money and social standing combined." Mrs. Whitmore was silent for a long moment. "I see," she said finally. "Then I suppose I have made this journey for nothing." She returned to her carriage without another word. As it rolled away down the dusty road, Rebecca felt Thomas's arm come around her shoulders. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I am all right." Rebecca leaned into his solid warmth. "You were magnificent." "Nobody threatens my family," Thomas said simply. "Not wealthy Boston matrons, not drifters, nobody. You and Tommy are mine to protect." We are lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one, Rebecca. Every single day I am grateful you answered my advertisement and came west." Tommy woke then, letting out a demanding cry, and the tension broke. Thomas went to pick up his son, cradling the baby against his chest with practiced ease. "What do you say we take a break from work?" he suggested. "We could hitch up the wagon, head down to Miller's Creek, and have a picnic. Tommy has not been on an adventure yet." Rebecca smiled. "That sounds perfect." They spent the rest of that spring afternoon by the creek, which was running high with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Tommy lay on a blanket, watching the way sunlight played through the cottonwood leaves, while Thomas and Rebecca sat close together. They talked about their plans for the ranch, about maybe getting some sheep in addition to the cattle, about eventually building a bigger house with more bedrooms. "More bedrooms?" Rebecca asked with a smile. "Are you planning for more children?" Thomas looked at her, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. "I hope so. If you want them, I would love to fill this ranch with our children, raise a whole family together." "I want that too," Rebecca said. "I want to give Tommy brothers and sisters. I want to build a life with you that is so full of love and laughter that the hard times do not matter." "Then that is what we will do." Thomas kissed her, long and sweet, while the creek burbled nearby and Tommy made happy baby sounds. Over the next 2 years, the ranch prospered. Thomas's hard work and Rebecca's careful management made the operation successful enough to expand. They bought more land, increased the herd, and hired 2 additional ranch hands. Rebecca's garden flourished, and she began selling preserves and vegetables in Oro Grande, earning money that she saved carefully. Tommy grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's dark hair and curiosity. He followed Thomas everywhere, his chubby legs working hard to keep up with his father's long strides. Thomas was infinitely patient, teaching his son about horses and cattle, showing him how to be gentle with animals, and telling him stories under the stars. In the summer of 1881, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. When she told Thomas, he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "Another baby," he exclaimed. "Tommy is going to be a big brother." "Put me down, you fool," Rebecca said, but she was laughing. This pregnancy was easier than her first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was deliriously happy. She felt safe and loved, surrounded by family and security. When her daughter was born in February 1882, it was Thomas who delivered her, coached by Mrs. Anderson, but doing the actual work himself because the baby came too fast. "It is a girl," he said in wonder, holding the squalling infant. "Rebecca, we have a daughter." They named her Sarah after Thomas's mother, and she was a placid, easy baby compared to Tommy's demanding infancy. Tommy was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything. Thomas built a small bed for him in the second bedroom, declaring him a big boy now, but Tommy often crept back to sleep on the floor beside Sarah's cradle. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to thrive, and the Harper family became well known in Oro Grande and the surrounding area. Thomas was respected for his fairness in business and his skill with cattle. Rebecca became friends with other ranch wives, hosting occasional gatherings where women shared recipes and news. Charlie retired from ranch work when his arthritis became too painful, but Thomas built him a small cabin on the property so he could stay close to the family he had come to love. Miguel married a woman from town and moved to a house Thomas helped him build on the eastern edge of the ranch. Young Sam, no longer young at 25, became the ranch foreman, a position he handled with surprising maturity. On a warm evening in May 1884, Rebecca and Thomas sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Tommy, now 5, was teaching 3-year-old Sarah how to skip stones in a bucket of water. Sarah, determined as ever, was concentrating fiercely on her task. "You ever think about how we started?" Rebecca asked, leaning her head on Thomas's shoulder. "All the time," Thomas replied. "I think about you stepping off that stagecoach, scared and brave all at once. I think about how close I came to sending you away. But you did not. No, I saw something in your eyes that day, a strength that matched my own. I knew then that you would be a good partner. I thought you were just being kind." "I was being practical," Thomas corrected with a smile. "But somewhere along the way, practical turned into love, and now I cannot imagine my life without you." Rebecca turned to kiss him, a familiar comfort after 6 years of marriage. "I used to think Edmund broke something in me, that I would never trust a man again. But you put me back together, piece by piece, just by being yourself." "You did the same for me," Thomas said. "After my first wife died, I thought I was done with feeling anything. I went through the motions of living, but I was not really alive. Then you came, and suddenly I had reasons to come home at the end of the day, reasons to plan for the future, reasons to care. Mama, Papa, look." Tommy had successfully taught Sarah to skip a stone, and both children were jumping with excitement. "I see," Rebecca called back. "That was wonderful." Thomas stood and stretched. "I should check the water level in the north pasture before it gets dark. Want to walk with me? Always." They collected the children and walked out together as a family, the evening sun painting everything in warm gold light. The ranch spread around them, solid and permanent, a testament to hard work and love. Rebecca thought about the desperate woman she had been, stepping off that stagecoach with a belly full of shame and fear. She thought about the man who had looked at her and seen not a problem to solve but a person worth fighting for. Later that summer, Rebecca received a letter forwarded from Boston. It was from one of the friends she still corresponded with, and it contained unexpected news. Edmund Whitmore had died, killed in a carriage accident while intoxicated. His mother, Cordelia, had apparently suffered a stroke shortly after and was in declining health. Rebecca read the letter twice, waiting to feel something. Grief, vindication, regret, anything. But all she felt was a distant sort of sadness for lives wasted on pride and cruelty. Edmund had been her past, but he was so far removed from her present that he felt like a character in a story she had once read. She showed the letter to Thomas that evening after the children were in bed. "How do you feel?" he asked, always concerned for her emotional state. "I feel grateful," Rebecca said honestly. "Grateful that I did not end up trapped in that life. If Edmund had married me, I would have been miserable. He would have been a terrible husband and a worse father. His death does not change anything for us, but it does mean that Tommy will never have to face questions about his paternity. As far as the world knows, you are his father, and now there is nobody left who would say otherwise." "I am his father," Thomas said firmly, "and Sarah's father, and the father of any other children we might have." "Are you hoping for more?" Rebecca asked with a smile. "Would you think less of me if I said yes? I love our life, Rebecca. I love our family. I would happily have a dozen children if you were willing." "Let us start with one more and see how we feel," Rebecca said. "But yes, I want more children too. I want this house to be full of noise and laughter and love. Then we are in agreement." Thomas pulled her close, as we seem to be about most things. "Not everything," Rebecca teased. "You still insist on wearing those awful old boots with the hole in the sole. These boots have character. They have holes. Same thing." Rebecca laughed and kissed him, this man who had saved her and then loved her beyond all expectation. Their third child, a son they named James, was born the following spring. Then came another daughter, Ellen, 2 years after that. The ranch house grew as the family did, with Thomas adding rooms and eventually a second story. Tommy grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. At 18, he was already talking about taking over more responsibilities, eager to prove himself. Sarah developed a talent for training horses, able to gentle even the most stubborn animals with patience and kindness. James and Ellen were still young, but showed signs of inheriting their parents' work ethic and determination. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Thomas surprised Rebecca with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Miguel's family and spent 5 days in the city, staying in a hotel that seemed impossibly luxurious after years of ranch living. Thomas bought her a new dress and they went to the theater and ate in restaurants with white tablecloths. "This is wonderful," Rebecca said as they walked along the waterfront. "But I miss home." "Me too," Thomas admitted. "I never thought I would be the kind of man who gets homesick after 5 days. That is because home is not just a place anymore. It is the people waiting for us." They returned to Oro Grande laden with gifts for the children and stories to tell. Tommy wanted to hear all about the city, while Sarah was more interested in the horses they had seen. James demanded a story about the ocean, which he had never seen, and little Ellen just wanted her mother to hold her. As the years passed, the Harper family became an integral part of the Oro Grande community. Thomas served on the town council, Rebecca helped establish a school, and their children were friends with nearly every young person in the area. The ranch prospered through hard years and good, a reliable source of quality cattle and employment. In 1895, when Tommy was 16, a young woman came to work as a schoolteacher in Oro Grande. Tommy was smitten immediately, and Rebecca watched with amusement as her oldest son tried to impress the teacher with his knowledge and manners. Thomas gave him advice, and eventually, Tommy worked up the courage to court her properly. They married 2 years later when Tommy was 18 and Emily was 20, and Thomas gave them land on the eastern edge of the ranch to start their own place. "That is how it starts," Thomas said, watching Tommy and Emily ride off toward their new home. One generation handing things off to the next. "Are you feeling old?" Rebecca teased. "I am feeling blessed," Thomas corrected. "I have lived to see my son become a man about to start his own family. Not everyone gets that." Sarah married at 20, a cowboy from a neighboring ranch who loved horses as much as she did. James showed interest in studying law, wanting to represent ranchers against the railroad companies that were increasingly causing problems. Ellen, now 13, talked about becoming a doctor, inspired by the elderly Mrs. Anderson who still practiced midwifery in the area. Through it all, Rebecca and Thomas remained the steady center of their growing family. They were in their 40s now, weathered by sun and work but still strong. Their love had deepened over the years, becoming something as fundamental as breathing. They still shared morning coffee on the porch, still talked about their days, still reached for each other in the night. One evening in 1898, 20 years after Rebecca first stepped off that stagecoach, she and Thomas sat on their porch watching the sunset. Tommy and Emily's first child, a daughter, slept in Rebecca's arms. She was a grandmother now, a concept that both amazed and delighted her. "Do you remember that first day?" Thomas asked, echoing a conversation they had had many times over the years. "Every detail," Rebecca replied. "I was so scared. I thought you would send me away when you saw I was pregnant. I remember thinking you looked terrified but determined, like you would fight the whole world if you had to." Thomas reached over to touch the baby's tiny hand. "I am glad I made the choice I did. I am glad I said that child would know my name as father." "Tommy is so proud to be your son," Rebecca said softly. He tells everyone that you are the best man he knows. He is biased. He is right. Thomas smiled and took her free hand. We built something good here, Rebecca. A family, a home, a legacy. When I am gone, this ranch will go on, and our children and grandchildren will carry our values forward. That is more than most people get. You are not going anywhere for a long time, Rebecca said firmly. We still have years ahead of us, years of watching our grandchildren grow, of annoying each other, of sitting on this porch. Promise, promise. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The baby slept peacefully, secure in her grandmother's arms. From inside the house came the sounds of Sarah and Ellen preparing dinner, their voices rising and falling in familiar argument over seasoning. James was in town but would be home soon, probably with stories about his apprenticeship at the law office. Rebecca thought about the woman she had been 20 years ago, desperate and alone, carrying the shame of a child conceived outside marriage. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime. She had been transformed by this place, by this man beside her, by the family they had created together. She had learned that strength came not from perfection but from survival, that love was a choice made every day, and that family was about commitment rather than blood. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked, reading her silence accurately. "I am thinking that I would not change a single thing," Rebecca said. "Not the heartbreak that brought me here, not the fear, not the struggles. All of it led me to this moment, to this life with you. I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive." "I am the lucky one," Thomas countered. "We can both be lucky. Deal." Thomas stood and offered his hand. "Come on, wife, let us go have dinner with our family." Rebecca took his hand and let him help her up, careful not to wake the sleeping baby. They walked into their home together, into the warmth and noise and love that filled every corner. This was their legacy, not just land and cattle, but a family built on acceptance, on choosing love over fear, on being brave enough to start again. In the years that followed, the Harper family continued to grow and thrive. Tommy and Emily had 3 children. Sarah had 2. James eventually married a teacher from Sacramento, and Ellen did indeed become a doctor, one of the first female physicians in California. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But it all began with a moment of grace, with a man who looked at a pregnant, desperate woman and saw not a problem but a person deserving of kindness. It began with Thomas Harper saying, "That child will know my name as Father," and meaning it with his whole heart. From that foundation of acceptance and love, everything else grew. Rebecca and Thomas lived into their 70s, long enough to see great-grandchildren running through the ranch house, long enough to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by dozens of family members. When Rebecca died peacefully in her sleep at 74, Thomas followed 6 months later, as if he could not bear to be apart from her for long. At Thomas's funeral, Tommy, now a gray-haired man of 56, stood before the assembled family and friends. He talked about his father's integrity, his kindness, his strength. And then he told the story of how Thomas and Rebecca had met, of the choice his father had made to accept a mail-order bride who arrived pregnant with another man's child. "My father once told me that family is not about blood, it is about commitment," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. "He proved that every day of his life. He chose to be my father when he did not have to, and he never once made me feel like I was anything other than his son." That is the legacy he left, the understanding that love is a choice, and the best people choose it every single day. The family gathered afterward at the ranch house, sharing food and memories. The youngest great-grandchildren played in the yard where Tommy and Sarah and James and Ellen had once played. The old porch where Rebecca and Thomas had spent countless evenings was still there, the rocking chairs worn smooth by decades of use. As the sun set over the Mojave Desert, painting the sky in the same golds and purples that Rebecca and Thomas had watched for 50 years, the family felt their presence in every board of the house, every fence post on the land, every value they had passed down. The mail-order bride who had arrived scared and pregnant had become the matriarch of a dynasty. The rancher who had looked past convention to see a person in need had become a legend of kindness in his community. Their love story had not been easy or simple, but it had been real, and it had been theirs. From a moment of grace came a lifetime of commitment, and from that commitment came generations of family who knew that love was not about perfection, but about choosing each other, again and again, no matter what circumstances brought. In the end, that was the story of Rebecca and Thomas Harper, two people who found each other at their moments of greatest need, who built a life together from nothing but determination and love, and who proved that family is not defined by how it begins, but by how it endures. Their ranch stood as testament to that truth, a place where acceptance and commitment had transformed into something lasting and beautiful, something that would endure long after they were gone. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the cattle lowed softly in the distance, those who knew the story could almost see them there on the porch. Rebecca in her rocking chair, Thomas beside her, hands intertwined, watching another sunset over the land they had made into home. Two souls who had saved each other, and in doing so, had created something that would last forever.